Cool. Welcome everybody to the first training session. So today we're going to be taking a look at using site-wide CLI. So what have we got coming up? Let's have a look. So first of all, we'll get Dean to take us through installing CLI. He'll take us through how to do that on both Windows and Mac OS because they're slightly different. Just in case anybody needs to do that first on perhaps a new machine or for new people starting. Next, we'll take a look at how to connect to a site. So we'll be running the add command and that kind of thing. And I'll also show you, if you're not already aware of where you can find that add command more easily so that you don't have to type it all out. And then we'll take a look at key CLI commands. So we're actually going to take a look at pretty much all of the commands that are available today. And we'll show you, how to run them, what they do, and what they look like when they've been successful. And then finally, we'll take a look at some best practices. So we'll run through some sort of key points about how to manage sites with the CLI, among other things that make life a bit easier when you are using it. And then at the end, we'll circle back around and we'll come back to the questions that have been submitted and then open the floor up and you can ask anything you'd like. So first things first is installing the CLI. So we'll take a look at how to set that up on both Windows and Mac OS. Dean, over to you.
Thank you. Share my screen. Okay. So we do have a video on this for both systems. This is the documentation. I'll drop this link into the chat, and obviously it's on our developer site as well. So we do have these instructions here, and there's videos for each version. They were recorded a while ago, but they should still be, hopefully still be valid. I'll run through the Mac version first. It's harder, which usually isn't the case, and then switch over to Windows, which is similar instructions, but there's a step you sort of miss out in the middle. So the CLI runs on Node.js. I don't know how familiar people are with that. It's like a JavaScript packager and runtime engine built by, I think, the Chrome team essentially. So you go to nodejs.org. There's a link from the docs, and download this LTS version. It's essentially has longer support than this is almost like a beta version. It works with either, just we would always recommend the LTS version. Run through that installer. I've already got it installed, so I'm not going to do that right now. It's essentially clicking next lots of times. Once that's all set up, I'll skip Windows, but pop down to Mac. It's going to go into terminal now. Apple have changed some things with Mac OS recently, which makes this note here important. And then there's a one-time, so this is a one-time setup for essentially changing some default directories and permissions and things around how to install packages with Node.js. So we've got a link off to these steps here. You can essentially copy these in order. So the little button on the right-hand side, open your terminal app. There's many of them. And just paste those in. These ones, that didn't appear. Good start. Let's actually copy the text. These ones will fail for me because I've already obviously run them in the past, but essentially this is making a folder, setting Node.js once it's installed to use that folder, and then saving that as what we call a system variable. So next time you reboot your machine or log back in, it will know to use that correct location. Once that's all set up, if you get any errors through here, we'll mention the forum later, but stop at that point because any steps further down will probably fail if one of the previous steps has failed. But once that's run through, you then can check everything's set up by running either node or npm -v. So that will show you the versions that you have installed of Node.js, and npm comes with Node.js. When that's in, you can then run any of the npm commands. So to install, you pass in the name. So I'm going to run npm and install globally. So this means that I can use Cycler CLI anywhere on my machine, not just in the folder that I'm currently in, and then the name of our package. That will take, it depends on how fast your system is really, normally within sort of 10, 20 seconds. It's grabbing some dependencies that we use. So things like when you use the GraphQL editor, which we'll show later, that has a dependency on GraphQL, so it's just downloading and installing all of them. It's not a very exciting part of this part, unfortunately.
And I take it that this is the same install process for updating CLI as well. So it's not just for the first time, one-time installation.
Yeah, so this bit, sorry, yes, you'd use repeatedly. So whenever a new version is released, within the first 24 hours after it's been released, you'll get a notice after you finish using CLI that there's an updated version and you use the same command again. So that will always grab the latest version that's available. Cool, so that's installed. There's these, which is on our side to update some packages. They're not, we've checked them, they're not actually vulnerabilities in anything we use at the moment, so they're currently safe to ignore. So the easiest way to test is just to run -v again on CLI. So this will just output the version that's currently installed. And then if you've got any errors, it would say here that it's not installed or something similar. So popping over to Windows, essentially exactly the same, except missing that middle step of copying those commands from that web page. So you'd go to Node.js as a one-time setup and install this LTS version. And then once that's installed, again, you can check it's there. And then as an example here, if I try and use CLI, even though it's not installed, you'll get this, it's not recognized command error. So that's signaling to me that I need to go and install it. And it's exactly the same command on Windows. Once you're, same command if you can type it correctly, that is. Once you're within Node.js, it's all the commands are the same whether you're on Windows or Mac. So that would just chug along and install. And then you should be set up and ready to go. But yeah, any questions on, it can vary from machine to machine. So if there's something you've installed previously or a different version of Windows or Mac, say, there can be bumps along the road. We'll set up a forum space dedicated to the CLI and installation so that any questions can be dropped in there just in case someone else hits them as well. And then you can at least share ideas, or we can jump on a call afterwards if needed and run through them if they're very specific. Sorry, it's very slow because it's in a virtual machine, but you've seen it install already. So yeah, that's probably that. If you want to run through the commands, Martin.
Yeah, cool, excellent. I'll take it. Oh, can everybody still see the browser there? Yeah, cool. All right, so yeah, we'll take a look at how to connect to a site. So now that I've got it installed, we can switch over. So there's a couple of things you want to have open to begin with when you're connecting to a site. Obviously, the first one is an IDE. So ideally, you have something open where you can edit code and view the files, something that you normally develop in. And then we just open terminal as well. So the first thing that you really must do is create a folder for your project. So trying to run commands for the CLI on the root of your computer, etc., will quite often throw errors. It doesn't like that. So, but beyond that, it's nice to have all your files in one location and know that if you are going to run, some downloads or pull assets and move them around, you're not going to accidentally overwrite something that's elsewhere on your computer. So it just helps to keep it all contained. I've got one here for my test site. So what I'll do is just drop that into the CLI. So now I'm working within that project folder. And I can do the same. So I could check the version just to make sure, whoops. Right. There we go. Helps if you type it correctly. So I can check the version, just make sure I'm up to date. I knew I was, obviously, because I've been using it over the past week. So one other command, just as a really basic one, is if I know some developers don't like leaving the CLI. So what you can actually do is just type in help and it will give you a bit of a rundown of some of the commands you can run. So it saves you having to open up the docs elsewhere. You can also run that more specifically on commands. You could add help to a specific command to find out a bit more. So let's go into the add command. So how do we get started? Now, there is a command available in the docs. So if we come over to developers, as Dean mentioned, he dropped the link in the chat earlier. We can come over to introducing and you can find all of those. Now, we have the CLI command in here, but it has some bracketed commands. So these tags, as they were, get replaced by the data that you want to use. So you don't need to keep these in. You would replace it with something like the site name, or perhaps staging or production is quite a common one, and that is the instance name that you're going to try and connect to. It's just for your machine, so it doesn't matter what you call it. But rather than typing all of that out manually and then remembering to remove the tags, etc., we can actually just come over to the site settings of the site, and you can see that that initial command is already done for you. So we can just copy that and head back to terminal, and then we can just paste it in. And then I'll just need my password. Okay. There we go. So that will connect to the API, and then it in the background creates a config file. So it's a hidden file that just authorizes you to access your site. So now whatever we run within this folder, so Martin Test 101, we'll use that authentication. So the first thing that you'll probably want now to do is, unless you're working on a fresh site, in which case I'll come on to how you can use an initialize command instead, you'll want to pull down the information that's on your site already. So we would use site-wide CLI and then pull, and then you'll notice, so up here, I called my instance staging. So now down here, I'm just going to tell it to keep referencing that site. So now I'll just say staging, whoops. There we go. And it'll ask me if I'm sure, and I go capital Y to confirm, and then that'll gradually start pulling down all of the code files and things like that. And other assets, so CSS, etc. There we go. Now you can see in my code editor, we've got that config file that I was talking about, but also I now have two folders. So when you're working on a site, as I think many of you watching will know, because you will have already seen them, all of your core assets for the site are held within the Marketplace Builder folder. So in here, you've got all of your assets for your images, JavaScript, CSS, etc., but also things like pages and layouts for your web apps and modules and things like that. So I can come into, like about page, and then that will load in. And it's effectively like viewing the page in admin, except you see all this additional YAML at the top. So we'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment. Well, I'll do it now, actually. So the YAML at the top here, you'll see some of this in the documentation. Effectively, this defines parameters that interact with the admin and the front end. So you can see it's got information in here about like the name of the page, the URL, any redirects you want to have set up, etc. Now, in admin, we hide this for you because we provided fields where you can update that kind of information anyway. So if you are working in CLI, it's useful to go and check the docs to get the structure. Alternatively, what you could do is start pulling down from the site first, but we'll come on to that later. Cool, so next command obviously would be sync. So if we come on to sync, and again, I'm going to say staging. This is the command that acts like FTP. So it's one line. And now that sync is enabled, any changes I make to files within the Marketplace Builder folder will be automatically pushed up to the site. So I have the front end of my site here. So if I was to come over to About, we can see that content. So if I now add in something like hello, not help, send help. So there we go. So you can see in terminal, it's now synced and it's successful. So if we come back to the live page, we'll see my update in there.
That's syncing on, it's probably not obvious on the video, I suppose. That's syncing just when you hit save. So sync is watching for any file changes that happen within that folder, and then just automatically uploading or removing them depending on what action you've taken. I just realized you didn't visually press save, you used the keyboard shortcut, so it was kind of hard to tell.
Good point. Cool, so yeah, and equally, so I'll just take this back out. So that's there. Now, the other thing we can use sync for is syncing up assets. So as we know, you can upload images through the sites, but we can also upload them here. Now, the easiest way might be to just open in a new tab or a new window. Let's just grab that. So this is obviously my project folder. So I can come in and I can follow the same folder structure. I can come into assets and images. Now I've got just a folder with some pictures of tasty food because I wanted to torture all of us in the morning. So if I drop this into images and then go back to terminal, you can see it's gradually going to go through and sync those images up. So it will use the folder location that I've put it in, and it will just put them up a little bit like FTP. So I can also come in here and find those now. Equally, if you have sync turned on, you can delete a file. So I can say, all right, I want to delete this, and then it will remove that from the site as well. So there's a couple of different ways you can do it there. I'm sure everyone's familiar because it acts very much like FTP. The other way to go about doing things would be to turn sync off. So if you hold, so if you're on Mac and you do Control and C, you can back out of the sync. And then we can actually just deploy all at once. So if you're making changes and edits locally, and you don't want your code to influence either the staging or production site, you can turn sync off, just work on your machine. And then when you're ready, you can then deploy that up. So we can do site-wide CLI, deploy and staging as well. And that will basically take all of the files that it finds in these folders and push that up to my site. So yes, I would like to do that. And it will go off and do exactly that. Now, the basic command for deploy will actually ignore the assets, the images folder, so it won't upload those, but there is an option to include them if you'd like to. Just for speed, for the demo, I've just removed them because obviously it would add to the size and it would take a little bit longer. Okay. So once that's finished, obviously, depending on the size, yeah, as I said, it will take longer. So even if your code base is larger, it might take a little bit longer than a small site. We'll circle back around to some of the best practices on this later on as well. Cool. So next one for everybody to use and be aware of is logs. Now, this wasn't here in the beginning, so it's actually quite when we first started CLI. We can actually call live logs from the site. So apologies, 1 second. There we go. So it works in much the same way as everything else. So you do logs and then staging like this. Now, what it's going to do is going to go and grab the 20 most recent logs for you. So it will dump that out along with some other information. But it'll also begin a live log on the site, as I say. So when somebody loads pages, submits forms and things like that, you'll get a running log here. So if you have a form that is perhaps not submitting properly or is submitting, but you're not quite getting it to do what you want afterwards in terms of data, etc. If there's an issue, maybe it's not sending an email, the autoresponder, you can turn live logs on and test it, and you can quite often find out the issue and a bit more information about it. So that is useful to have there.
Also with this, I put a link into the Platform docs. You can essentially write your own logs within Liquid. So there's a log tag. You can also filter them. So you could say only load errors, for example. But you can log either Liquid or just plain text. So say if you're working on quite a long Liquid file or function or loop or something, and you don't know what the data is at that point, you can put a log in there, and then when you run that page or that include, it will go into this area, so you can sort of see behind the scenes what's happening to a particular object in Liquid, because that might not normally be visible on the page.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so a useful one to have there. So again, I'm just going to back out of that with Control C. So we've just got a couple of others, so some useful commands. So quite often, Dean and I were doing some testing yesterday, and we do it quite regularly as well. You go, oh, how many, which instance names have I got in this folder? So if it's particularly useful if you're running maybe a folder to staging and production at the same time, etc. You need to just list those out. So if I type in list here, it will give me all of the environments that I've added within the current folder. So it's a nice little reminder just so you can find out the names again and carry on. Equally, you can do so modules. Again, quite a small useful one. So modules and then the instance name, and then it will go and check which modules you have installed on that instance. So you can see, for example, I've got Studio installed, etc. So perhaps useful if you've made a duplicate of the site, maybe you've got a turnkey site and you just want to double check before you start working on it, you have actually got all of the modules that you need installed. So the next one is export. So there's a couple of different versions, and there are, as with many of the commands that we've gone through, you'll notice in the docs there are a few different flags. So I mentioned whether or not you include assets earlier, for example. Export is a good command if you're trying to keep backups of your site. So if you're trying to keep a version history and you'd like to periodically take a backup, so I know many of you will do that maybe once a month for your clients, it might be a service you offer, you can run export with staging, and this will, in addition to all of the files and folders that we've gotten here, provide an export of your data. So any web apps, module items, etc., you will get a copy of. So it's just going to run and download. If I open the folder over here, it's probably easier. There we go. So it will go and run, there you go. And then basically it's going to process it. It will just take a moment. So it downloads as a zip and then it'll unpack it. There you go, now it's finished. So you can see now it's done the data as well. And you'll see I've got then a data file in here. It's also visible in my code editor. So I can even beautify. There we go. So the current format is JSON. So that's quite useful if you have a backup. Obviously you can convert to CSV using an online converter, but you don't actually need to, because as you noticed when I started typing it in earlier, I could also run it with a CSV flag. There we go. So rather than giving me the data file in JSON, it will then convert that to a CSV in a zip format. And then you can just open the CSV as normal and run it in a table. So it works the same way. I'll just run that really quickly and show you as well. So that'll just miss an extra step. So this kind of thing can be useful. I don't know if you're periodically clearing out cases for forms, etc., along with users and other areas. Maybe you're cycling through blogs because there's a lot of content being written on the site. It just gives you a full backup and a snapshot in time. We'll come on to like versioning later, but you can use third-party things like GitHub, etc. And we'll touch on that and explain a little bit more detail later on in this session.
Just another distinction between pull and export. Pull will only pull down assets that are classed as dev assets, so JavaScript, CSS, essentially text-based files. So if there's things like images, videos, PDFs, etc., they will always be ignored by pull just because there can be gigabytes and thousands of images, and we don't want you downloading them every single time. Export by default will also ignore them, but there is a flag on the end, I believe it's -W for with assets, that will then also loop through and download anything in the assets folder. So, or anything it can, things like PSDs, I think could be okay, but I'm not too sure. But yeah, images, videos, etc., it will also download those. So if you're doing a complete full site backup, including all assets, then export will be your friend rather than pull.
Yeah, nice one. So yeah, as you can see, we've now got the other version. So in addition to my JSON, because I've run the CSV, if I open this zip, it will just give me a CSV table file. And you can see all the columns with the data in there. So you've got a couple of different ways you can do that. Excellent. So Dean, I think I'm going to pass back over to you. So Dean's going to take us through sort of the GUI and the GraphQL and stuff like that.
2 seconds, press run button. There we go. Cool. So if I just move into one of my test sites. So this is, well, for working with data, this is probably the most important command that we've got. So we call it GUI. There's essentially 2 windows or things that run at that point. I'll do the liquid one first because it's quite a short and simple one. So you can either copy these commands, or if you hold a shortcut, I'm not sure what it is on Windows, I'm afraid, they're clickable. And then we've got, so this is linked directly with the website that you're currently running the CLI on, and you've got a liquid evaluator. So if you want to test a small piece of liquid and without going into admin, running the whole page, setting up a page, loading it front end, You can test your liquid in here, press execute or control and enter, and then it will output whatever that liquid converts to. So obviously there's not really any data in here. You could, in theory, run graph queries, but I wouldn't recommend it in this use case. But say you were setting up a date converter in your front end and you couldn't remember if you want the full year, you couldn't remember if it was a capital Y or a lowercase y, you can quickly test that in here and it would just output whatever the answer for that liquid is. If it's not valid, you'll get an error message down the bottom here as well. So it can be useful for very quick ideas or just trying to scope something out or just double check something without loading up the docs. So closing that one, the important one probably is what we call graph IQL or graphical. So this is connecting to your site and then letting you run what is essentially the querying language on your data. So quite a few different things going on here. I'll start in the middle. So history will contain distinctive to this site. So if you swap sites, this history tab will change. It will show the last 20 or so graph IQL or GraphQL commands that you've run. So you can click on these and they'll just load back in. You then got these buttons at the top. They basically show and hide these panels. The play button will run the query and then you get the results on the right-hand side here. I'll run through the actual queries in a second. And then the documentation. So this is very useful for if you don't know exactly what format the queries are in or how to write them. This is a live docs explorer that will run through all the available parameters and like names of the queries. So if we were to start afresh and say we want to write a query, and then these are all the queries that are currently available. So for now, we want to load, let's say, all of the records on the website. So we've got records down here. This returns a collection of records in the system. So start typing records, we'll get a sort of shortcut pop-up, which shows you all the available names, depending on what you started typing in. And again, so now we've got the options of filter, page, and sort. Say we skipped all of them. I'll come back to why. And then you can go into records and you can see all the available output from those. So I just want to see how many records are in the site, let's say. If I run that, I'll get an error. So there are certain parameters that are needed within GraphQL. They're down the right-hand side here, they have this exclamation mark on the end. So these are required fields. So I forgot to put per page in essentially. So I only want to return 20 of them. And then we know that in total, there's 581 records on this site. So we're not going to run through every single way to write a query or how to do them. We'll set up a forum area later for sharing of useful queries. But the idea is you can test them here before adding them to your site. And you've also got a way to sort of read how they can be formatted. For example, if I wanted to filter those to say, only show me ones where they contain a form. So these are all the records where there's just form entries. If you don't know exactly how to write all of these and all the different brackets and things like that, you've also got this Explorer area on the left-hand side, sorry. So down here, this is very similar to this area on the right, but not without all of the examples and all the different filters, etc. So from here, you can click on these, so records, and then it will start writing those queries for you and also include the default parameters. So we have to have per page. The system knows that, so it's added it for us. I can then go in and change these. So 20, for example, and it will update the query, obviously. And then as an output, say I'd like total entries and the ID and the table. So we want to know what the ID is of each result and where it sits within, what database it sits within. And using this left-hand side, Explorer will always write valid GraphQL because obviously it knows the format it's meant to be in. So this is incredibly useful for looking up data that even may not be in the system. You could have custom databases, testing graph queries before adding them to the site via CLI, before syncing them, or just checking that data's there, or if it's back in time or hidden for some reason. Just keep in mind this is obviously live to your website, so any information you run in here does affect the site. So there's also mutations which will let you do make changes such as add, update, delete. So you could add data in here. You can also remove all records from the site. So just be careful. Cool. I think that's that one. But yeah, we'll set up a forum area because this is as useful as the queries you can write, I suppose. So we'll set up an area on there for people to share different queries, and we can put some example ones in as well for how to get information out of a particular database, say, so a certain web app, just to double check or see how many items are in a single form, cases, etc. Back to you, I think, Ryan.
Excellent. Yeah, nice one. Thank you. So just a couple more things to go through. I share my screen. That's the way we want to go. So we've actually got one more command that I wanted to mention. It's not as useful for you guys, but it is useful to know that it's there. So I'll just quickly show that. So actually, I don't need to do that. So if we come over, the best way to explain this would be to come over to the docs. We have a debug mode. So this is something that really is only useful if you're talking to the support team and we ask you to run it. But it's good to know where the commands are if you need to, and how you would go about using it. So there's different versions slightly depending on whether you're Windows or Mac OS, basically, because that's Linux based. So if we copy this command, we can come back to terminal and hit enter on that. Oops, no, I can't because I have been using staging. Obviously your instance name on the end there. And then basically it will run the same command, but it will run with debug mode on. So you can see up here, it will give me a lot more information. So occasionally the team might ask you to run a command using debug at the beginning of it, just so we can get some extra data and help out if there's a bit of a bug or an issue, or something's failing for you. So useful to know that that's there, and how you can use that. So at the start, I mean, you would add debug equals true to the beginning of any of the commands that you would run, and it will just output some additional logging before that. It doesn't have to be sync. So that's also quite useful. Oops. Cool. So let's head back and we'll discuss some best practices. I think, Dean, you're probably going to show a couple of examples on this kind of thing as well. So let's head in. So we've done the core commands, which we've gone through. So that's pretty much all of the commands that are on the document, I think. So unless we add more, that's every command that you could possibly want to run using CLI. So yeah, as I said, best practices next. So there's a couple that we wanted to discuss. The first one being maintaining staging versus production instances. So if you have a live site, which is production, and as many of you want to do as developers, is to work on a staging instance instead, but with the same code and files and everything, so that just in case you do break something while you're building, it's not going to affect the live site. So for now, best practice on this we recommend would be to, if you have a live site and you're going to add a new area or something, use the copy command. So if we head back into here, on site settings for any of your sites, you can come over to copies and make a copy. So you can either copy to an existing site, or what we'd recommend here is a new staging site. So this will take an exact copy of your live site and put it into a trial site for you, which means you can then play around with it, and you can build a new area and not be worried about affecting that live site. Obviously, if we're already working on production, for example, say I'd been running all these commands with my live site, not staging, you could then just run the add command again with your new staging site. So once you've created it, you just come and copy that add command again. You could either use it in the same folder, or probably a safer route would be to create a new project folder, just so you're not mixing some of the files there. Once you're ready and the staging site's looking good, you could then deploy any of the code file changes that you've made up to your production site. So that's kind of the cycle that we recommend staying on, and then just delete your staging sites when you're done. And if you're going to do another set of work, copy from the production site again. We do have a roadmap task for a proper implementation staging environments where there'll be a much tighter synchronization between a live site and a staging site. So at the moment, if you're trying to constantly maintain a staging site or multiple staging sites versus one live site, some of the data can get a bit tricky to stay on top of. So if people are creating new data forms on the live site, maybe form submissions, CRM users, new web apps, etc. When you're trying to copy those between instances at the moment using CLI, you might end up clashing with the IDs because the ID might have already been used by the time you come back. So this roadmap task that the team are going to implement will make that much smoother, and then you won't have to worry about that. Anything to add on that, Dean?
No, just that it would be only for code, really. So there's no data upload handling in CLI. Obviously, you could use GraphQL mutations to add and remove data, but there's no, if you deploy a code base, it is a code base, hence the name. So it's only changes to the code files. So yeah, the good example here would be have two instances in the same folder. You would then sync to your staging instance to build your new feature and test. And obviously, you know, the production instance is safe and people aren't going to see things that are in progress. And then when you're done, you do one single deploy of just code to the production instance. So you're essentially releasing that new feature in one go. And then you know that the production instance hasn't had any, maybe a page that shouldn't have been shown while it was in dev, etc.
Yeah, nice one. Cool. So the second best practice would be, so particularly for anybody who's maybe not used CLI a lot, or even if you are familiar with CLI and you're starting to work on an area of site that you've never worked on before, is create first in admin and then pull the site down. So if I was to come back to my code files, what we've got in here, so we've got pages and things like that. So that's within views. So I could create a new page right now. I could go, right, I want to create a new file, my new page, but now there's nothing in it. So rather than having to check the docs and work out how you might write the YAML, with YAML also, if we come in here, these spaces that are at the beginnings of the lines are important. The formatting is important, otherwise it will break. So rather than trying to work all of that out and keep hitting error messages until you get it right, you could create your new page or your new form or your new web app in admin first and then download it. So pull from your site and then it will have all of the YAML pre-created for you. So that's a good tip there. The next one is one that we hit fairly early on, is avoid using a cloud folder. So we haven't used all of them, so you may find that some are okay and some are not. But Dropbox typically, if you are using the plugin where it sort of watches an area of your computer so that it can sync files up and down to the cloud, if you create a site and then turn sync on, and you're editing files and you're syncing a file up to your site, that will read it as a change, and then Dropbox will find that that's changed. And then when Dropbox uploads that to their cloud, it will also change the file, and then it will keep syncing between the two, and it creates a bit of an infinite loop. So some are okay and some are not, but that's one to watch out for. That can create some problems. And then the final one is that, yes, using CLI, you can use SAS and SCSS, and then compile it and upload your minified files using sync as well. Dean, I think you were going to have you had a bit of a demo for this one, is that right?
Yeah, just to show sort of how your build scripts can live outside of the folder that CLI needs to obviously be uploaded. So I've got an example site here. It's my test site, so it's a bit of a mess. But some build scripts, for example, there's Webpack, Gulp, Grunt, there's tons of them. They want to be on the root, and you may already have links to assets folders. So as an example, I've got a test SAS file here. This is outside of the Marketplace Builder folder. So if I turn sync on, and then go back to my code editor and make a change here, and save that, that will not get synced because obviously it's not in the relevant folder. So nothing will happen here. It's just waiting for something to change. So you can have any relevant SAS or JavaScript files that you don't want. So say you're bundling up hundreds of JavaScript files to then have one end file popular with like single page apps. You can keep them outside of all the folder if you don't need them uploaded, and then just keep your build script pointing into the assets folder. So I've got a SAS script here that's essentially saying take that test file and then output a CSS file into Marketplace Builder assets. So I've obviously run this before, but there's a test file here. It's not got my new version of the code. So if I go and run SAS now, or this could be Webpack or anything, it's now found that CSS file because that change has obviously taken place within the correct folder, and then only uploaded that. So this will then obviously have an effect on the front end of the website because your HTML would be pointing to this CSS file, but all of your configuration files for Webpack, JavaScript that you don't need on the instance can be kept separate. So don't know if anyone's doing that sort of level of build scripts, but it's just useful to know that you don't have to have everything hosted on the instance. And if you've got things that are then obfuscated or encrypted in some way before they're uploaded, they can be kept off the website.
Yeah, cool. And I take it you don't only have to run the SAS compiler in terminal, you could use the IDE plugin or what have you and point it to.
Yeah, as long as they're sort of agnostic to each other, really. Webpack or whatever SAS would be just building and dumping a file wherever you've told it to go. It doesn't know what's happening on the other end. And then in the same time, Cycler CLI is just going, oh, something's changed. It doesn't know where it's come from or what's changed it. It doesn't really care to any extent. It's just finding a change and then syncing that file.
Yeah, cool. Nice one. Excellent, thank you. I'll take the screen back and just quickly going to run through. So I wanted to, as Dean touched on earlier, we wanted to sort of highlight the developer community. Now, we obviously have had the forum for a while, and that's been used by pretty much everybody except developers, because we haven't really told everybody about it. So we just wanted to highlight that there is an area for developers in the forum. So if we come over here, there we go. So we've got marketers, designers, and developers at the bottom when I move zoom. So this is an area that you guys can all join. It's easy to join. So if we come to the top, you can see all groups, for example, and then you'll see a full list and you can join. It's easy, you just one click and you get in straight away. So we would like to encourage you, if you've got questions, if you've been trying to do some of the CLI stuff afterwards and can't, if you've got questions about graph query, you could put stuff in here and you could all help answer each other. And obviously our team can monitor and answer questions that get missed. We've also got some topics now, as Dean mentioned, we're going to be taking a look at that and seeing if we can add in others or make them structurally make more sense. So we might add in some others that we haven't thought of. But when you're creating a post, to make things easy to find or to notify people who are following it, I could say that I want to ask a question about GraphQL. And then if I submit that, it will just add it as a tag to my post, but you can follow these topics. So then everybody following that will get notified. So they're quite useful there. So I just wanted to highlight those. And then finally, let's get into some questions. Okay, so first one being from Sunil. So can we uninstall modules using CLI CLI, and can we delete users using CLI? We actually touched on that earlier, but no, currently you can't uninstall modules with CLI. But if you have a big project where something's creating an issue, obviously reach out to the support team and we can remove them manually at the moment. Yes, you can delete CRM users using CLI. So CRM users are just data objects basically on a site. So Dean ran through graph query earlier. As you mentioned, you can delete anything you'd like using that. So you can run through the commands. But I would say, unless, it depends what you're trying to do, but it's probably quicker just to delete users from admin. Just
to note on that, it's CRM users within a site, sorry, not users within Portal.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can't delete admin users. Michael asks, is there a way to fall back to a previous version? Let me move zoom. Can you use the same folder for develop versus deploy? So let's answer these in order. Yes, you can fall back to a previous version. I'll see, I might ask Dean actually to just quickly show that command in a moment. So you can install any specific version historically of the CLI. So if you if you update to the new one and it's clashing with something for you on your computer, you can just roll back. We'll show you that command in just a sec. Can you use the same folder for developers to deploy? Yes, you can. So you can develop in the same one and then deploy it. You could run both staging and production from the same folder if you wanted to. It depends how you would like to work. Does the CLI synchronize on my computer with other developers I might hire? It can, but you might want to be careful about how conflicts effectively. So if you happen to have all worked on the same file, or somebody's edited something, you can end up overwriting. So what we'd recommend in addition is using a versioning software like GitHub, for example. I think we linked to that in the docs. And that will just help keep a version history. So whenever you guys submit changes to the site, you can also commit to GitHub, and then it helps create a development loop there. Dean, could I swing to you and just quickly show that command for installing specific versions?
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
Just a note on that last one as well. Obviously, just be careful about if you're starting work, say you've been on a lovely holiday for the week, and you come back to a site, just being careful about pulling the site before starting work, because obviously your local files may be a day, a week, 2 weeks, sort of stale by that point. So as Martin said, if you sync anything, it's just going to blindly overwrite whatever was there. It doesn't take into account which one's newer or anything like that. As for specific versions, at the bottom of the documentation here, there's, and in the left-hand side, there's our changelog history. So these obviously go out whenever there's been an update. Some of them I wouldn't recommend going very far back, as Martin said. If it's just needed, say there was a release and it's broken something, you can temporarily go back. Some stuff is dependent on the API side as well. So if you go back to a release from 2019, potentially it doesn't work, but obviously there's a reason we've updated that since. So yeah, say you wanted to go back one particular version, you just use the version number there, and put it on the end of the install command. So you can run install whenever you feel like it, really. It will, if there's a newer version out and you run the command like this, it will just grab the new version. If you've already got the new version, it essentially just reinstalls it in case you've changed the file somewhere. They're unlikely, but so on the end you can put @ and then just the version number that you'd like to install. So following the numbering system here, so say I wanted to go back a version, run it like that. npm will obviously see that @ go and work out if it's a valid version. If you put in one that's not, it will show an error message. And then go and download that version and install it over the top of the one that you previously had. So if I give that a couple of seconds to finish, and then run the version command afterwards. I always feel like they take longer when you're waiting for them. Nearly done. Come on. The bar's all the way across. There we go. So if I now run version again, it's dropped down to the version before. So you'll always get notifications to upgrade. So after I finish running a command, you may see a message every now and then that says a newer version is released with a link to the changelog. But yeah, that's just useful to know in case you either want to pin a particular version or drop down just in case something went wrong.
Yeah, cool. Nice one. Awesome, thank you. Brilliant. Thanks all.